Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hacking HR's April series. Today, we're going to be talking about remote work strategies, designing and implementing effective remote work policies. I am your host, Lauren Lefkowitz. I'm an executive coach with Fine as a Trap Coaching, and I work with workaholics, people pleasers, and perfectionists, which ends up being a lot of us HR folks. My background is 20 years in corporate HR. And I am so pleased to have with me Dr. Susan King, who we'll bring to the stage right now. And we're going to have a pretty intimate conversation about remote work strategies. So, Dr. King, let's have you join us on stage.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be
Welcome.
here today.
Yes, welcome. So, Susan, why don't you start by introducing yourself and tell us who you are and what your specialties are and why this topic is important to you?
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. So, I'm a human resources professional, having been in that field for the last 25 plus years. And I'm particularly interested because for me, it's about being human in human resources. Many times we work with people and somehow we don't realize that we are working with people. Like I always say, there was one occasion in which I entered a room and one staff was not feeling well the particular day, but there I was trying to work on performance goals. And I'm saying to myself, then how can I have a good interaction, a good relationship on the work if the employee is not, feeling good that day? And that has caused me to realize that no matter what we do, whatever our profession is, that we need to sustain that humanity in human resources. And so with the topic here today on remote strategies, it touches me because I have been into that portfolio with remote work. And I feel that I have a lot to share with my guests. Again, I'm Dr. Susan King. I have over 25 years of experience in human resources management, taken from change management, talent management, recruitment, performance management throughout my whole career. And so that's a lot of expertise that I would really want to share and help others. Thank you.
Amazing. I'm so happy to be talking with you today. So as we get started, I want to invite our audience to ask questions, make comments. I love for this to be a real discussion with our watchers and listeners. And so we'll pay attention to the comments. And if we see something that we can bring into the conversation, we'll be happy to. But
Great.
let's start with just sort of the basics of what we know that COVID was a driver, a very sudden driver for us to move to remote work. And then we've been in this world where nobody was going to come back to the office, and then everybody was going to come back to the office, and now we're somewhere in the middle. So what do you think right now drives the decision making for somebody to for a company to decide remote work is where it's at?
Great question. So let me set the foundation here because remote work for many of us existed many years ago. It was just in different forms and variations, for example, like telecommuting, work from home, flexible work arrangements. But yes, COVID-19 was the catalyst for change in which remote work was given even greater attention. And where we see that is going is like the work from home. There was a study done by the US Bureau, and their labor statistics showed that even before COVID, that there were about 7 to 9% of the population who were already on remote work. However, after COVID hit, then that number went up. I think there was a Pew Research Center report that says it was like 80%, in terms of people beginning to work from home. So it was something that the whole business world was thrown into more deeply as a result of catalyst, COVID-19, sorry, in terms of making that decision for remote work, which basically felt like from the work from home. And so you find that some of the things that had to be considered then was the technological. Did they have the technology to facilitate people or staff or employees working from home? Did we have the change that would facilitate that? For example, staff needed to have internet at home. Were you going to let them use their own internet or have them be supplied with the organization's internet system to get the work done? So I think the technology was one of the great major things that kind of, even when compounded with COVID, like push this thing further. There was also globalization, because we know that businesses are not just taking place in any just one part of the world. It's all international, it's all global. And to facilitate that, you have workers be working for the same organization, but some in Belize, some in America, some in Colombia. So how do we facilitate that change? And so the technology was one of the basic foundations that had to facilitate that remote work.
And such a wonderful point about the different places we're working globally. We have been working remotely, right? Even when we've been in offices in our local regional areas, we've been working remotely for years. And to be able to acknowledge that and be able to collaborate across the globe, excuse me, really speaks to our ability to work remotely. Thank you so much for that insight. And I want to introduce our second panelist, who I'm so glad made it to the stage with us. Cindy, will you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why this topic is important to you.
It might help if I unmute myself before I start speaking, right? So, my name is Cindy. I've been doing HR for close to 24 years. And this topic is important to me because I think this is it's still somewhat of the norm. And I know a lot of our, employees are pushing for it to stay as the norm. And I think that's really important to kind of be able to meet them, at their point of need when it's business allowed, in the sense of, I cannot have a manufacturing worker working remotely, right? That just doesn't work. But wherever we're able to meet them at that point, I think it's important.
Thank you so much. So glad to have you here with us. We've heard a lot, especially in the last year. And Cindy, I was saying as you were coming on stage, that we've gone through this wave of, some companies were remote. COVID forced so many of us to be remote. All of a sudden, everybody said, we can do this forever. And then the tides turned and we said, nope, we can't. Everybody come back to the office. So Dr. King talked about the drivers of this trend for remote work and pointed out the global remote aspect as well. And started to talk about technology needs, that if you're going to have a successful remote workforce, technology needs to be a factor. What other factors, and either of you just come on in, there are only three of us, so it should be easy to politely interrupt each other or not interrupt each other. But what are the factors that we need to really think about in order to have a successful remote workforce?
I think building the proper culture is very key. And what I mean by that is, if we're going to have remote employees, we need to be able to actually have the capability of being able to do employee engagement pieces, right? Because how can we keep them engaged if we have it solely remote? And at one of the companies that I used to work at before, even before COVID hit, it was already a remote hybrid type of company where you were not required to be in the office. It was a choice. You weren't mandated to be in 1 day, 2 days a week. It's up to you, right? And so then COVID hit and it was like, oh, everybody remote. And then they wanted to start. They actually made a mandate because the company was sold. They made a mandate to actually start bringing back folks in on a schedule, though. And so I think, just sticking to the culture and creating the culture and sticking to it is very, very key in any, in any way, shape, or form to make sure that it's successful. And the key would be to make sure that you're engaging those employees. Because not everybody is capable of handling remote work. And I don't mean by that you cannot trust them to get their work done. In a mental health state, we actually had employees that went from fully in office to remote, and they couldn't handle it. They said, you know what, this is not the job for me. Either we can get me an office. And at that time, we were covering so many different states that we're like, well, we don't have an office out there because it's just you. And so they ended up resigning for that reason. So I think just creating the proper culture, creating the employee engagement, having a buddy system to make sure that they don't feel lonely. I think those are like really big factors into creating a healthy and successful remote, environment.
Yeah, I take the point of Sandy very well. To that, I want to bring in the aspect of the communication and the collaboration while working remotely, because there need to be defined, there need to be clarity on the what is to be done, who will do what, when it's to be delivered. You still need to have it operating as if you were in an office situation. So for me, having clear channels of communication. Are we going to be communicating by email steadily? Are we going to be having virtual meetings? Are we going to be sharing videos? What are those communication channels look like in a remote work situation? Also, we have to look at the aspect of the what they call the cybersecurity risk. Now that we have employees working from home, what is the risk of having our data being, excuse me, circled around outside of the organization through whatever systems? What is the risk there? Are we prepared to have those checks, those passwords all set, so that we ensure that there's no data breaches? The cultural adaptation, yes, I understand, it's fine. We need to have everybody still feel belonging, still feel engaged, still feel committed. I mean, how do we do that? So those are some of the points that we need to look at. Also, the workload management. How do we decide who does what when they're out there? I mean, I've worked in situations where even though the technology was provided, then staff couldn't even work remotely because in some countries we had like the power failures and all these things being down and work couldn't get done. How do we do the performance management? How do we measure if the goals have been delivered? I mean, those are all things that needs to be looked into when considering a fully remote work environment.
Wonderful insights. I love us talking about sort of the theory behind, right, what the planning needs to look like. And Lucia actually worded in our audience, worded our next question for me beautifully, which is, can you please give examples of successful culture and engagement initiatives in a remote setting? So we've talked about some of the factors to consider, but specifically, what are some things that we can do in a remote setting to culture build, to engage, and Sandy, to your point earlier, to make sure our employees are okay from a mental health perspective?
So one of the things that I did that I think was beneficial was we used to have that particular department that was the one that was 100% remote. That department would have a virtual luncheon every month. So everybody got together, whatever time zone they were at, right? And they actually had a lunch together, the whole department. We had a lot of one-on-ones, in the sense of their manager would get with them, and have those one-on-ones, do them those mental health checks as well. And then once a quarter, what we did is we actually would do an a what is it called? Um, Team building event. So like one quarter, what we did is I sent out the canvases to and then paints to every single individual, and then they got together and actually did the painting. And it wasn't painting by numbers, it was actually, they had instructions and they had to follow the instructions on the video. And mind you, these are a lot of these individuals were software engineers, implementation analysts, more technical, more computer savvy individuals. And once they were done with the product, their little picture, they're like, wait a minute, I didn't know I could paint. So they discovered something about themselves by being a little uncomfortable with trying something new. They were able to discover that they had a hidden talent. So we ended up pushing that one out. We ended up doing it company wide because it was successful. So I think little things like that, where you send out, like another one we did was a terrarium, where they got together and they built a terrarium. Just things of that nature that are a little bit outside the box. Yes, can they be a little costly sometimes? Yes, but if you do your research, you'll be able to find some things that are within your budget. But just having those check-ins, having that buddy system, and especially like on onboarding timeframe, where you pair them up with someone and they're able to actually have another person that they're shadowing for a little while, and that they're able to, hey, you know what? I'm kind of struggling with this. How do you get used to, being, remote? How do you get used to, those kinds of questions where they can ask, so I think that was one of the things that was super key for me at the old company that I used to work at. That was the more successful things that I saw that we were able to do. And even like, let's say, for example, when we were that part of the staff was still remote, and then part of the staff was actually hybrid. What we would do is, let's say, for example, if we had a luncheon in our office, we would actually put a link and they could join in with the link, and we would actually send out what is it called, like a Uber Eats code. We would send it out so that they could actually be part of it, even though they were not physically there. They were still able to order their own lunch and still be part of the event, whether it was a baby shower, whether it was, a birthday, whatever the case might have been. We always made sure that we included them in whatever way, shape, or form we were able to.
What
So,
would you add,
okay,
Dr. King?
great. Yeah, I wanted to go on the technological aspect a little, because I wanted to make reference, particularly when the COVID-19 started, and there was this mad rush of persons not going to the office because, public health concerns and such like. And in my situation, one of the things that we have done was to ensure that, first of all, made a list of the staff, and each department had to do that, of the persons who are unable to come to the office. Want to ensure that they have the accessibility to the internet to use to get the work done. Also to ensure that we have the time frames in which they will work, because what I found happening in that period was a lot of mixture. We had the flexible work arrangements, some telecommuting or some work from home. All these were happening all at the same time during the COVID period. So you find like people going on leave, they can get an extra 2 weeks to telecommute from where they are. And we're not looking for you to work in the 9 to 5 time zone, because we're all over and our time zones are different. So you start to now look at deliverables. I mean, this is what we need to have delivered by so and so date. This is what we're looking forward for. So you, as an employee, you have that leverage to manage your own time. And a lot of employees found it to be very likable and engaging, because many was able to achieve what is called now the work-life balance. And we see that particularly with um, the mixture of the generations in the workforce. You find that the millennials, the Generation Z, they're more open to having this work-life balance, flexible work arrangement. And those of us who may be baby boomers, we still want to have some of the traditional approaching at work. So it's trying to navigate all of the generations at the same time. And here it is, in the technology was used to help that. So everyone, whichever piece was allotted or you chose, I mean, there was a reporting mechanism, because we still needed to give account for every employee. As a matter of fact, the wider organization had a bigger system where recording was made of persons who either checked in for the day and what they delivered. These systems were put in place to ensure that the productivity was still ongoing, goals were still achieved, and everyone was still being happy in their portfolio.
Wonderful insights. Thank you. A few other things I've seen from a tactical standpoint of that engagement. It are an open Zoom room where anybody can come in and co-work virtually, and specific times of day, as much as we can globally, if we are a global organization, specific times of day when you're expected to be available for meetings. And I know I have a friend who works for a company. She is on the East Coast of the United States, and some of her colleagues are in India, and it's like an 11 and a half hour difference. And so that's challenging, because who's working at 8 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock in the morning? So they have agreements that on this day of the week at this time, somebody is inconvenienced. And on this day of the week at this time, the other somebody is inconvenienced. And they have standing meetings at those times. And it makes it so they have more flexible hours with the hours that they're working. We have a we have a comment from LinkedIn user that's making me laugh, and also I agree with, because as HR professionals, we've heard the term forced fun, right? Come in, have fun with us, come to this event. You'll love it, even though you might hate it. And this it says LinkedIn user. They haven't given permission for their name to be used by StreamYard, but it says, be careful about forced fun. I've been to thousands of baby showers and engagement events, would prefer to never attend another at my time of life. No kids, never married. So yes, let's be careful of making the fun events mandatory. I think the opportunity is really, how do we engage our workforce? And something we haven't mentioned in this engagement opportunity, and I think that this is really common with HR folks, is that we often put the pressure on ourselves or on our management team to figure it out. So how might you go about engaging your staff to find out what they want? And for this LinkedIn user, it might be nothing. I don't want anything. I want to do my job remotely, have quiet, attend meetings when necessary, and then be left alone. For others, like some of the folks you mentioned, Cindy, who weren't doing super well with not having engagement and not having those more fun activities, they want all the fun. Send me the paint. Bring me into the virtual class, bring me virtual trivia, engage me, buddy me up with somebody. So how can we engage our staffs to find out what they want? Dr. King, why don't you jump in first this time?
Okay, so in my experiences with remote work, engaging staff meant, it was even before you got deep into remote work. where you have the staff involved in many of the issues that relate to them, and not we as the supervisor or managers just making the decisions and passing them down. So getting them involved was one. So during the remote period, you find there were a lot of virtual meetings that were being held. And in that, we asked the questions. I mean, how would you like to work during this period? Because now we are in the COVID, I'm basically in the COVID period. We're in this COVID period. What works best for you? Do you want to come to the office still despite the public health concerns? Or do you want to work from home? Do you want to work a 9 to 5? Do you want to work at your time in terms of your telecommuting and just deliver? So it's the inputs that came out directly from the staff that were used to form that collation of procedures that we needed to follow during the period. And so in that way, it was not too difficult having persons not kind of working with it, because that was their inputs. And so we just collated them and made them procedures for us all to work with. I mean, of course, when again, myself on the technology part, when we have the excuses of there's no electricity and I couldn't do any work, sometimes you try to be you have to be understanding, because depending on where you're located, you would know already what the situation would be in that location. And if it's a case that's something that's required urgently, then it asks, can you come to the office between so and so hours? Let's get this done. So it's more like trying to work with the staff so we can have that kind of continuous and harmonious work environment.
So what I will add to that will be, I think it starts when you interview, when you start recruiting. At the very start, if you know that this particular role is 100% remote, the interview questions that you ask are super key. And one of those would be, how do this is going to be 100% remote. These are the type of events that we do. We're setting the expectations, right? We tell them we do, team building event every quarter. We do a monthly luncheon. We do one-on-ones. And you set those expectations and you ask the question, is there any of these that you do not feel comfortable participating in? And, but at the very beginning, you're already setting those expectations. This is what the training is going to look like. You are going to be paired with a buddy. You are going to be, doing XYZ. You're going to be assigned this type of task. Or I think it just starts at the very, very beginning. And for those individuals that we have that have already been part of the company, and that we didn't do that with, I think one of the big things would actually be the surveys, right? That's where the surveys come into place. And we ask, how do you feel about the events that we're doing? So that, yes, we don't do the forced fun, where it is, I would say the only ones that would be a mandatory is your one-on-one with your supervisor, because you guys are checking in, right? Everything else is voluntary. And we always, all the events that we did, we always said, it's up to you. This is what we're doing. If you want to be part of it, awesome. If you don't. And the other thing is this too, not a lot of people feel comfortable being on camera, right? And so I think that was one big factor where a lot of people were like, you know what, well, I'm willing to participate, but can I have my camera off? And so I think just that understanding, of I don't like to be on camera. And I think that's a big factor to be taken into consideration as well when we're doing all of this.
Dr. King, anything to add?
No, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
that was some
Yeah.
valid points. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love hearing about, it starts at recruitment. In a company that has a high retention rate, or or a long history and a number of employees who have to adapt. How do you help those people adapt to a remote environment if that's their new normal?
I'll go ahead and go first. I think one of the big things is just asking where their comfort zone is, and how they, how they are more comfortable, how they're more successful themselves. How do they, because you want to use their strengths. Yes, you want to develop those weaknesses, or not necessarily weaknesses, but areas of improvement, right? But you want to make sure that you're so fully focused on their positives and how they like things. Also checking in how they don't like things and trying to work on that aspect of it. I think for certain roles in some of the companies that I worked at where it was 100% remote, we actually had the opposite. We didn't have high retention, we had high turnover. And it was because the training was so intensive, it was so long, but it needed to be that way, just because of the fact that what their job was. But again, I think it just really comes from at the very beginning. When you're doing your interviews, you're setting the proper expectations, and you're making sure that they understand this is how we operate, this is how long it's going to take you to really grasp the job. And you provide them with data. You let them know, look, on average, the 1 out of 3 that get hired for this role, don't make it. And the reason why they don't make it is because they get flustered with the training. And these are the things that we've heard back, So I think it's just being transparent in those roles that you have challenge, and in those roles that you have success. I think that is very, very key, to be as transparent as you can. What has made other individuals successful, for the ones that you have high retention on. Here are some of the things. Is this something that you're willing to try out? But I think it's just knowing your audience, because it's not a one size fits all. So I think that what's going to make me comfortable might not make Dr. King comfortable with, in her uncomfortable zones of remote work might not be my uncomfortable zone. So I think it's just catering it to that particular individual and making sure that you're doing your checkpoints. And after recruiting, you do either your 30-day, your 60-day, your 90-day, where it's not so much, this is what you're doing, this is where you should be at. No, it's more of a just, hey, how are you doing? How are you liking it? Is there anything we can further do to make you feel more welcome, more successful, or to make you feel more comfortable? Things of that nature, I think, go a long way, to be able to help with, being able to retain those employees. And yeah, like somebody said on here, would give some remote employees additional specific KPIs. Yes, absolutely. I would give them, specific ones, just depending again on the job and on what it is that the role details. I would definitely do that. Yes.
Yeah. So to that point, I just wanted to add that, working remotely, it's only the disposition that the individual will be at, but the job itself remains the same in terms of what those deliverables are or what the responsibilities are. It remains the same. It's the disposition where you're located. That's what makes a difference in the remote. And true to the point, yeah, we need to be considerate of the employee's well-being, because there could be a case where, and I remember a case of an employee and was feeling very lonely and felt burnt out. But like Sandy said, we had to build in a buddy system where you do checks with that employee because you're not face to face with them. And if you're the supervisor, the manager, that's an additional role or responsibility that you will have in a remote setting, that you need to be checking in with the staff to find out, is everything okay? Are you making it? Do you need more help? What assistance? You don't be afraid to reach out, in addition to whatever meetings you may be having virtually to, go through the process of the work. But yes, the whole employee well-being is important in the remote work setting, because you don't want to, like, you just about the work, you give them the work, and then you don't hear from them anymore, and then there could be another situation going on like that. So as managers, supervisors, we need to be on top of the game, where we are communicating, whether it's daily, at the end of the day, by the morning, just checking in. And for me, that even holds not just basically for the remote, and that's just a basic humanity. It's you. Even if you're in the office and you come in, is everything okay? How are you proceeding with the work? Do you need some help? What is it you need? It's just that humanity in the human resources.
Absolutely. Somebody, I've lost the comment because we've had a number of comments come in, but somebody made a distinction for us that one-on-ones are business meetings, and so they don't get included in the forced fun or the voluntary events. And when you're in an office, you have an opportunity to see each other's faces. You have an opportunity to see when somebody doesn't get up from their seat, who normally does get up from their seat, or when somebody who normally doesn't does. And you get to see changes in behavior. When you're remote, you don't necessarily get to see that, especially if you're working with somebody who in their one-on-ones does not come on screen, if they're doing them, by audio only. So there's an opportunity to craft your one-on-ones with your employees in a way that addresses those things. Would you like me to check in on you? Or do you want these meetings to be work product only? Or can I have the opportunity to ask how you're doing and what you need other than the work product kind of stuff? And some employees won't want that. It's really important to get to know your employees, what they want from work, whether the socialization side is important to them, or whether they just come in to do a job and then want to leave. So let's imagine right now that you have a company in front of you who is deciding that remote work is their way of the future. What policies do you put in place? What is the framework? How do you get the senior executive staff on board? And Dr. King, I'd love to start with you on this question. Like, how do you start building out the framework, and what's sort of the order of operations in getting that done?
Okay, so in starting a framework for remote work, one of the first things we need to ensure is that that's the way they want to go. Because everybody may say, no, not fully remote, hybrid. Oh, let's just do telecommuting or flexible work arrangements, or just work from home. So the first thing is to ensure that we have the senior buy-in that this is the way we want to go with remote work. Maybe we can have all the options there, because it will differ, for individuals as we go along. And for me, that is a framework I would start with, having all the options for remote work, whether it's telecommuting, work from home, what you call it, flexible work arrangements. I have it all there. Next, understand that we need to have the access and the reliability. Do we have the technological infrastructure to have remote work in place in the organization? If that is a yes, go. We have the software tools where everyone can be accessible, that these systems are reliable, that everybody can access, and not when they're working in Jamaica, Guyana, or wherever things are breaking down, but it's working well in the US. No, these are all decisions that have to be made even before, I would say, pen put to paper and formalizing stuff. So it's having that buy-in where the organization needs to go, and also making sure that we have good communication and collaboration techniques put out there for any aspect of the remote work. How are we going to be communicating? How are you going to be hearing from your employees? What are you going to be doing? Email, video, virtual? What are those? What does this thing look like? What does communication look like in remote work? Also, the employee well-being. So these are all, I may not have them in a particular order, but these are all factors that needs to be considered when putting together a framework for remote work.
And on a little bit of a slight different information is also making sure, let's say, for example, you have multi-state or multi-country, that you are doing the proper payroll setups, because you're going to need to have, different IDs for different states. You're going to be having to tax your employees differently. Not everybody gets taxed the same. So having the proper onboarding forms that will entail, your tax forms is super key, as well as, just insurance. When you're actually getting your workers' comp, your liability, all those addresses, every employee address has to be added on there. And anytime you have an addition to the team or a termination, that information has to actually be sent over to your broker to be able to add them into the workers' comp, into the liability insurance. Having a cyber policy is super key. I think aside from just your normal liability and your regular employee, and employer policies and stuff like that, the cyber one is super key. This way, should there be any cyber attacks, making sure that your staff understands, you don't click on suspicious emails, and I think one key thing would be when you're onboarding is doing a safety presentation regarding cyber, especially for those that are 100% remote or are even, hybrid. I think those are super key. Your employee handbook has to contain the different laws for those different states. And I tell you, because I used to be responsible for 15. At one point it was 15, and then we ended up getting to 26 different states that I was responsible for in the US. And so that was one of the big things that I used to do. And understanding that in certain states, it's a monopolistic state. Therefore, workers' comp is going to have to be directly through the state. Insurance, example, Hawaii. If you have any employees in Hawaii, you're not going to be able to put them on your health policy. They're going to have a standalone policy. So understanding all those different factors, I think, is super key when you're trying to actually implement a full remote environment. And to Dr. King's point, I do believe that aside from asking for the buy-in from your senior leadership, you also have to make sure that your staff is on board. I will give you an example. We had individuals that even through COVID said, you know what, I have to be in the office. I will not be able to. I have my grandson at home. I have such and such at home. It's too much of a distraction. I cannot do it. So just making sure that you leave it to where you don't force them into a remote environment as well, where you give them the opportunity to say, yes, I choose to be remote. No, I don't choose to be remote. I think it's also very key and important.
Thank you. So final question. If you were going to be working with a company that was transitioning from in-office or in-office hybrid to fully remote, and most of your executive team was on board, but you had the one or two outliers who felt that everybody needed to be in the office all of the time. The only way to check in on people is to see them and see their face and meet their eyes. How do you have a conversation with those outliers when the decision has been made that remote is the next iteration of the company, and they are adamant that it won't work for them or their team? Dr. King, why don't you start?
Okay, great. Thanks. Of course, in any change management initiative, you will always find that you will have some resistance to change, and that is a given. So, what do we do with those who resist the change? One of the first things I would do is to try to show them out the rationale or the scope, why this is necessary. Why is it necessary that we move into a remote work environment? Ensure that they understand that data and the effects or the impact that remote work can have. And in all remote work also, it's not that we're pushing everyone away from the office. There is still that area where those who want to be to the office can go to the office. The remote situation is not like having everybody away from the office. We're having flexible work arrangements. We're having work from home. We're having telecommuting. All these are options. We have those who want to stay in the office. And so I still think that there is a space for those who don't wish to be on a remote setting by coming to the office, which goes as normal, unless there's a situation where the whole office is closed out. And if that is the case, then the employee, after showing out the whole scope and the rationale for being that way, I don't want to say that they have to be with it, but the choice would be theirs at that time. That's my take on that.
Sandy,
I would
anything to
agree
add?
with you on that. I would agree with you on that, Dr. King. And I would say, I think one of the big things would also be showing data results and giving them, the different perspectives as to why it has been successful for other companies that are like the one that we have, right? That are like the same department that they have, and why it's been proven successful. And not just because, here's the thing, a lot of that can come from fear. Well, how do I manage? Now you're telling me to adapt as a manager. You're telling me to adapt as a supervisor when this is something that I'm super uncomfortable with, right? So I think if we look at it from that perspective, and we also give them the necessary tools and say, here are some other stuff, that others have done. Maybe this might help you. Or what areas are you feeling uncomfortable about it? Why do you solely believe that it is not going to be effective for you and your team? And trying to find a middle ground. It's a little bit of a give and take, right? Just trying to fully get them to understand, but also allowing for them to actually be heard. And then you just having the necessary data and backup and solutions, as well as resources to help them be able to adapt to the new norm.
Yeah. And sometimes that resistance, I think it actually came out silently by you, Cindy, is just a fear, you know? And by asking them those questions and trying to reach them at the point where they feel a bit fearful for the change, and trying to give them the tools like, okay, you're going to have some training. We're not just going to put this on everyone like that. Everyone is going through training, work through the system, the trainings, the tools, and let's see after that how you still feel about the situation.
Yeah, I think there's often a fear that we're going to lose this executive member, right? That if they don't come on board, and if we don't figure out how to make them come on board, that there's this fear we're going to lose them and the company won't survive losing whoever this key member of the staff is. And we have a comment from a LinkedIn user, like any other team member, why would we have a department impacted because one manager chooses not to adapt? When a decision's been made, it's been made. And so our opportunity as human resources professionals is to help everybody come on board. And what we have to know is that not everybody wants to. And so there is an opportunity, and I call it an opportunity because it's not a decision point where you say, oh, okay, you're not coming on board, you're out. There's an opportunity, I think, to really have the conversations about this decision has been made. How do we bring you on board to it? Or if you don't want to come on board to it, how do we have a graceful exit for you that feels good for you, that feels productive for you, and that helps your team move with the rest of the organization out into remote work?
So, Lauren, on that point, and that is the reason why with any change initiative, you have to get the people involved from the very beginning. And so if they're involved from the very beginning, then they would be walking you through as with the leader on this whole change. And they will be learning what will be changing, what will be taking place. So at the end, when the implementation is made, I'm thinking that there shouldn't be too many surprises, but of course, you will still have a remnant who still would not agree, even though they may be walking through with you on the changes. And I guess addressing that point is what yourself and Cindy said, how we can go about, with that opportunity and letting them know, giving them the training, the tools, and whatever to see if they can have a change in the mindset of this whole initiative.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a wonderful point. And and I know that even when we do all of the right things the right way and we're bringing people into the fold and we're giving them the training, I think we've all worked with that outlier who tells you it's not going to work till the very, very end. And we want to bring them in, and we don't want their departments or their teams to be impacted because they aren't willing to come along for the ride. So there's great opportunity to bring everybody into the fold. And like you said, Dr. King, there's this opportunity. If everybody on leadership is involved all the way, we hope that everybody comes on in and goes along with what the company is shifting towards. But part of having a culture of employees who are engaged is them knowing that their leadership has been in on changes and has come to agreement on those changes. Any final points from either of you before we close our discussion?
Okay, so I'll go first. So for me, what I want to say is to us all that we're living in a world where there's a lot of technological advancement and changes going on. And we need to embrace those changes. And we are doing so when it comes to certain aspects. I mean, we embrace the changes with the social media, with everything else. And I'm saying when it comes to the organizational effectiveness and the changes to be made to make things more efficient and optimize processes and all of that, why do we need to be so not supportive of something like that? So for me, it's embracing that change. And in so doing, we embrace a culture of adaptation where we adapt ourselves to the organizational culture of change, and always knowing that with change, we have what is called the growth mindset. We can only grow if we change. And so for me, we need to embrace those technological changes. Also, we need to ensure that there's good communication and collaboration in those changes that will affect everyone, employees, leaders, and everything. Ensure there's good communication and collaboration there, and that we take control of the changes. I mean, globalization is here. It's not going, and it's getting wide, it's expanding, and more things are happening. So we're seeing all of that. And so our organizations have to step up if we're not yet already there. And so as individuals, as employees, we need to just embrace that. I mean, I can't say it any other way, but just embrace the change, and you'll be amazed of how successful, how you also as an individual will be having growth with the change. Thank you.
What I would like to remind everybody is that it's not a one size fits all. So what works for one company, for one individual, it doesn't work for the other. So I think just having that understanding, being willing to have those uncomfortable conversations to get someone comfortable, being ready to have those trainings, those additional resources, that additional data, catering to the needs of the individuals that it's going to impact, and just the transparency of it all, and being very upfront. You are your first line of defense with the hiring process. So make sure that you're setting the proper expectations right from the start. If you guys are considering going from, in office to fully remote, and that's potentially coming, letting those that are actually applying for the roles know that that's coming. And again, it starts from the very first day that you make contact with that candidate, and that eventually will end up turning into your employee. Set the proper expectations, set the proper mindset, and it's not a one size fits all. Let's cater to those. Let's understand what they need and work from there.
Thank you so much, both of you, for such a rich and important discussion today on remote work. If you're in our audience, thank you for your comments and your engagement today. And feel free to connect with any of us over on LinkedIn. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, everyone.